Well, good morning, everyone. It's great to be here today in person with many of my colleagues from around the area. As our city continues to endure gun violence at record levels, I want to make sure that the community is up to speed on the efforts to help fight this plague and how Portlanders can help. Today, you're going to hear updates from PAC-G, local, county, federal, and community partners who are working together to combat gun violence in Portland. I'd like to take a moment this morning to introduce a new member of my staff, Stephanie Howard, who recently joined my team as the new director for community safety. Stephanie has a strong background in public safety, recently serving as the deputy monitor in the office of the independent monitor for the city and county of Denver. And before that, she served as a tribal attorney with the office of the Colorado State Public Defender. We welcome Stephanie to the city of Portland and look forward to harnessing her expertise for community safety initiatives. For today's event, we will begin by hearing from Assistant Attorney, U.S. Attorney Craig Gabriel, who can explain how our federal partners are working with us to reduce gun violence in the city of Portland. After that, Assistant District Attorney Kirsten Snowden of the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office will provide an update on county efforts from a prosecution perspective. Next, we invite Portland Police Chief Chuck Lavelle and leadership from the Portland Police Bureau to address the work happening at the local law enforcement level and to discuss the results that we're seeing thus far. Finally, you're going to hear from Djimet Dogo and Lynn Tan from IRCO, which is the Immigrant Refugee Community Organization, who will share the intervention work being done by our community-based partners. And so to start, I'll turn this over to Rich, who will facilitate.
Okay, our first speaker will be Assistant U.S. Attorney Craig Gabriel.
Good morning. Again, my name is Craig Gabriel, and I'm the chief of the criminal division for the United States Attorney's Office here in Portland. U.S. Attorney Scott Ospaug has a conflict this morning, and he does send his regards. I want to thank the mayor and everyone participating this morning. I also want to congratulate Stephanie Howard and tell her that we do look forward to working with her. Before I go any further, I offer my deepest condolences to the victims and family members who suffer from gun violence here in our community. I want to spend my time this morning highlighting two federal prosecutions that show the far-reaching trauma of firearms and gun violence. The first case involves sex trafficking of minors by force and coercion. Just last Friday, on March 11th, after a week-long trial, a federal jury here in Portland found a defendant named John L. Jackson guilty of multiple counts of sex trafficking of two teenage girls. Jackson trafficked the girls in Portland and in Southwest Washington. He drugged them, he sexually abused them, and he sold them to other men for sex. Throughout this horrific abuse, Jackson would brandish a firearm to intimidate and control the victims. Jackson is in the custody of the United States Marshal Service, and now that he has been found guilty by a jury, he faces a long prison term. This case is an example of how firearms are used to threaten and intimidate vulnerable victims and facilitate sex trafficking of minors here in our own community. This case was investigated jointly by the FBI and the Portland Police Bureau. The second case I want to announce is very recent, and it's being made public here for the first time. This case highlights how gun crime is a regional issue extending beyond the city of Portland. 2 days ago, on March 15th, ATF agents and the Salem Police Department served a search warrant at a house in Salem. During the search warrant, law enforcement seized 63 firearms in a single home. The defendant in this case is Tyler Harnden. Harnden is alleged to be part of a massive ghost gun manufacturing operation here in Oregon. Harnden is also a convicted felon and prohibited from possessing firearms. Further, Harnden is accused of distributing fentanyl in exchange for receiving more firearms. This is a wide-ranging and ongoing investigation, so I cannot say more about it now, but the investigation does show that illegal firearms and the violence that goes with them are problems that we have to address together with federal, local, and regional law enforcement partners. In conclusion, at the U.S. Attorney's Office, community safety is our highest priority. That includes preventing and prosecuting gun violence. The Jackson and Harnden cases that I've highlighted today are two examples of our commitment to working collaboratively with our partners, including Stephanie, to reduce violent crime and keep people safe. Thank you.
And our next speaker will be Assistant District Attorney Kirsten Snowden from the Multnomah County District Attorney's Office.
Good morning. I'm Chief Deputy District Attorney Kirsten Snowden. I'd like to begin by thanking the Mayor's Office for bringing us all together to continue to shed light on what is now simply a public health crisis in our community. I'd also like to begin by saying directly to those in our community who have suffered losses and trauma from gun violence, how sorry we are. We respond, members of our office respond to each of the homicides that occur on our streets alongside the police, and our victim advocates meet with families very early on to explain the process. It can be very traumatic, the process, in addition to the incredible loss of life that we are experiencing. Like the U.S. Attorney's Office, our office's #1 priority is gun violence. And I can tell you that, unfortunately, our gun violence referrals are up over 450%. We have been working alongside our law enforcement partners, including the U.S. Attorney's Office, the Portland Police Bureau, as part of the Portland Area Crime Gun Initiative. We staff cases weekly to talk about investigative leads, where the best place is jurisdictionally to prosecute a case, whether that's in federal court or in state court. And unfortunately, I can say that we're becoming overwhelmed. As many of you have read in the papers recently, our criminal justice system is simply in crisis. We have criminal defense attorneys who are unable to accept new cases due to crushing workloads. And we in the DA's office are not immune from that as well. We have reallocated the resources that we have to focus on gun violence. And I can say that, unfortunately, just this week alone, we initiated the prosecution in 3 separate cases where different people had been shot in the face. This is our #1 priority, but we can't do it without the adequate resources that we need to prosecute all of the cases that come to our office: gun violence, property crimes, and others. Unfortunately, due to the crushing caseloads, we've lost over 150 years of prosecutorial experience in the last year alone. I'd like to illustrate the significance of this with a couple of quotes from folks who have recently left our office. One woman who worked as a deputy district attorney for 10 years and left less than a week ago said, "Historically, trial unit DDAs have heavy workloads. But in the past 2 years, the significant rise in homicides and violent felonies combined with the backlog of cases led to unsustainable workloads. Sexual assault cases were the majority of my caseload, and work frequently spilled over into evenings, weekends, and even vacation time. Exhaustion and burnout make it impossible to give our best to vulnerable victims. Another male DDA who worked in our office for 20 years, who recently left, said, "The feeling in the office at the time I left was that dedicated, public service-minded people were being ground into the dirt under the crushing weight of exploding workloads caused by staffing reductions. There were approximately 100 deputy district attorneys when I started, and 20 years later, there are barely 75, even though the population of Multnomah County has increased over 20% during this time. It's just not sustainable." I want to make the public aware of this crisis, but know that with the resources we have, we are focused on the most violent offenders. We are doing everything in our power with the tools available to us to keep these offenders in custody and to seek the longest possible sentences under the law for the most dangerous in our community. In 2022, we are on pace to set a new record for the number of gun violence cases that we've issued. Despite our challenges, we will always continue to fight for the victims and their families. Thank you.
Thank you, Kirsten. Next up, we have Police Chief Chuck Lavelle.
Thank you, Rich. I want to start this morning by joining my colleagues in their acknowledgement of the victims and the families who are feeling the brunt of the gun violence. I think it's very important that we keep them at the forefront of this work that we're doing. I also do want to open with a thank you to the media, not only for being here today, but for helping us appeal to those who took evidence from the scene at a shooting near Normandale Park. Since our request for help, one of the several pieces of evidence has been returned. So thank you for putting out this message, and thank you to the person who returned it. However, unfortunately, there are still some more pieces of evidence we are looking to have turned in and witnesses we would still like to talk to. So we ask that you now continue to spread this message. I want to talk first about homicides. We're already at 20 homicides for this year, 19 of which are gunshot victims. Our homicide detectives are very committed to their cases. I know this can be frustrating sometimes for the media and for the public. We're all attuned to social media and the speed at which news travels, but homicide investigators are thinking on a different level. They're completely committed to their victims and the victims' loved ones. Our investigators are focused on protecting the integrity of the case, which means ensuring witnesses or suspects don't know the information detectives may know. Following up on every lead and seeking every bit of information they can. It's a difficult balance between providing public information and protecting the case to its end. We can make that arrest and have a good prosecutable case. We've made several arrests recently. Detectives arrested the suspect involved in the Dawson Park homicide of Mark Johnson, as well as the killer of Jacob Dreyer. They also arrested the suspect for the death of James Wise in Old Town. I'm continually proud of our detectives and the work they do. They get called out at all hours of the night to investigate the most heinous crimes, and they remain dedicated to those victims and fighting for their families and finding their killers. To say thank you doesn't seem like enough, but I do want to recognize their efforts today. Now we'll transition to shootings. For 2022, we're averaging 21.9 shootings per week. Currently, that is just under 650 shootings for the year. If this trend continues, we'll end the year with just over 1,500 shootings, which would be a 14% increase over last year and a 266% increase over 2019. So that's why we're here today, because we're committed to stopping and reducing this trend. The Focus Intervention Team, or FIT, I have some members of that team here with me today. They've been operational for approximately 2 months. FIT has responded to many shootings, patrolled hotspot areas, followed up on investigative leads, and located and arrested individuals involved in gun violence. FIT has recovered approximately 19 firearms in their first 2 months and have arrested 32 individuals for various crimes. The crimes include gun possession crimes, aggravated assault, robbery-related crimes such as carjacking, as well as traffic-related crimes such as reckless driving and DUI. Several subjects have also been arrested on outstanding warrants. On a few occasions, FIT has been able to apprehend attempted murder suspects immediately following a shooting. This work is not just the focused intervention team, but also in coordination with precinct officers, K-9, air support, and sometimes our special emergency reaction team. FIT also is committed to meaningful community engagement, relationship building activities, such as recently spending time with the family and their kids related to a recent homicide. The members of our Enhanced Community Safety Team, or ECST, continue to work to investigate these gun crimes and use the technology available to link casings and seize weapons with other crimes. We continue to work with our area partners and youth violence prevention, as we know this is really going to take a collaborative effort to reduce gun violence in our community. And finally, I opened with an appeal and I'll close with an appeal. For every shooting, for every homicide, there are most likely people who have information that can help solve these cases. We want to do everything we can to try to bring at least the beginning stages of closure to those affected by gun violence. We need people's help to do so. We have Crime Stoppers where people can remain anonymous, and we ask you to just give us that vital information. And also, before I close, I want to take the opportunity to thank everyone who's working hard in our community to end gun violence. We can't do this work alone. It takes a lot of people doing a heavy lift and working together. So thank you to everyone who's taking part in that. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. Next up, we have Jimmy Dogo from the Immigrant and Refugee Community Organization. Oh, and we actually have two speakers. It'll be Jimmy and Lynn from IRCO. Thank you, guys.
Good morning. Thank you for having us here, and thank you, Mayor's Office, for including us, IRCO, as part of this conference. I'm Lynn Tan from the Director of Youth Services at IRCO, and Jimmy Dogo, Director of our Africa House Services. And we're here to speak about our experience as a community-based organization and how we support all these entities up here. So, as a community-based organization, we work with the Mayor's Office. We work with the Office of Violence Prevention in the City of Portland. We have partnerships. Chief Lavelle just talked about the FIT team, and IRCO has members participating as an advisory in an advisory capacity with Multnomah County. We've also got services and partnerships, and we also partner and consult with our law enforcement, and broader correctional systems as the youth and families that IRCO works with. So our immigrant, our refugee communities, our Asian, Pacific Islander, and African immigrant communities, and how we can support, because sometimes these communities are set up, and they're new. However, intersecting with all these entities as we know it, that's a little bit of a disconnect, culturally specific, culturally responsive practices, and how to actually prevent and provide the intervention services for the youth involved in these systems. So today, I would just set this up to say that, IRCO is in this position where we partner. We're here to support our immigrant and refugee communities, to partner with all these entities and our school systems to provide a myriad of services. So I'll just give you a setup, and then my colleague here, Jimmy, would share a story, and if time permits, we could share additional stories. So in the prevention and early intervention realm, so we're talking about working with youth as young as 13, 14 into your high school ages. We connect with them through referrals from schools and school systems. We hear about, there's been all this information presented about the shootings, the homicides, the trafficking. We are very much aware of all of that. But it's a matter of working and addressing those, or creating services, your prevention services working upstream. So this is why we work with the schools to have prevention services, connecting with referrals, starting there, creating pro-social activities. Guess what? Because right now, you already have lots of fights happening in schools, and we've been getting calls left and right from the schools. Hey, help us, we've got an African youth here. We don't know how to connect with the youth of the family, or Pacific Islander youth there. Help us. So we're in the schools, working with the schools, working with our colleagues here and institutions to provide prevention services, pro-social groups, after-school activities, working with Multnomah County to participate and partner in their after-school, their SUN service system to provide groups. We offer sports, recreational, wellness activities, open gyms, native literacy classes, dance, things that these youth and the families crave for, but maybe there's a disconnect after they've settled here. And therefore, there's also the opportunities for them to get into antisocial behavior, for lack of a better way to put it. And then finally, we also do life skills workshops. And we have resource fairs, working with also our other community-based organizations to partner. This work cannot be done alone. And in the summer, we also pilot and participate in summer youth employment opportunities. As far as the outreach and the wraparound services for the specific cases where now, like there's a conviction or there's a shooting, I'll pass it to Djimet to share a little bit about some of those stories.
Again, thank you, Lynn, and thank you, the mayor and the mayor office and all the law enforcement, especially Portland Police Bureau that is helping us in our community. Again, my name is Djimet Dogo. I am the Associate Director of IRCO and Director of Africa House. So additional to what my colleague Lynn just said, I want to also to add that we provide support to communities, especially the victim of gun violence, by helping them relocate from their apartment or when they're scared to going back to their apartment. So we help them relocate to the new place, or in some cases, we even help them move completely out of the area. And we, unfortunately, every morning we wake up and there is a case of shooting or gun violence in our community, especially the African refugee community. And right now, we're dealing with two recent cases. One homicide happened in February 20, and one shooting just happened last Tuesday on Powell and 92nd. So we've been trying our best to provide services to the family. What we do is we help for the homicide case, we still are helping the family with relocation, with fundraising for burial. We also behind the scene working with legislators, with our senators to help a family member who want to come and be at the funeral for their daughter, for their sisters and all those. So we are behind the scene, we do community comprehensive services where we connect family to resources, we connect victim or survival to culturally specific high skill mental health services so that they can access those resources. We also work to make sure that the victim rent are paid, utility are paid, and also help after they recover, help them with employment services. So again, we work closely with the CD Office of Gang Violence Reduction to provide all these resources to the family in need. So again, thank you so much for inviting us. And also, I want to take this opportunity to thank the law enforcement for working closely with our community in order to reduce those gang violence in our community. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Djimet and Lynn, and thank you for the work you do. And we'll now introduce Mayor Ted Wheeler.
Thank you. And thanks to all my colleagues who are standing with me here today. And thanks for members of the media giving voice to our presentation. I also want to extend my sincere condolences to everybody who has been impacted by gun violence and homicides in our community, particularly the family and the loved ones of people who have been lost. Community safety continues to be a top priority for my administration. We continue to focus our efforts to recruit new police officers and retain the best officers we have now. And I was privileged just this morning to attend a ceremony where we welcomed new officers and new public safety support specialists into the Portland Police Bureau, along with analysts, investigators, and officers being promoted to higher ranks within the Portland Police Bureau. We're also continually exploring opportunities to create new community partnerships and expand those that are already in place, as outlined by some of my colleagues this morning. Through these partnerships, law enforcement was able to investigate and arrest a suspect in the deadly shooting at Dawson Park. And that was a shooting that I personally visited amongst many others over the course of the last several years. And I'm glad to see that the wheels of justice are turning in that case. That suspect was also involved in other shootings in Portland and could have hurt others before he was removed from our streets. So I'm glad that he has been. As you've heard, the PAC-G partnership is showing progress, hard-won progress at that, progress that needs your help and your support in order to make a real difference in our community. I want to thank the great work of the focused intervention team that does its work with the direct involvement of FIT's Citizen Oversight Group, sometimes called the FITCOG. I want to thank Chair Pastor Ed and Vice Chair Kimberly Dixon for the ongoing leadership to help address gun violence using a new community-led policing model that, as the chief indicated, is showing early signs of success. You've already heard the early work of the FIT, but it's worth repeating because it shows that police reform is working and that if we had more funds for more officers and more PS3s, we could do even more to bring public safety to more Portlanders using a community-led community policing model. FIT launched its first patrols on January 19th. And in those 2 short months, FIT has made over 80 arrests, seized 25 guns, responded to over 500 calls for service, including the tragic incidents at Normandale and Dawson Parks. FIT is also working to strengthen relationships between law enforcement and the community at large. FIT officers are attending community events and spending time with the families of gun violence victims. Officers from FIT attend weekly meetings with the Citizen Oversight Committee and members of the public to ensure real-time transparency and accountability in their work. Importantly, FIT officers aren't just responding to violence. They're working to prevent violence from happening in the first place. FIT officers work to connect community members who are at risk with community-based organizations who can provide services to those community members before violence occurs. The Office of Violence Prevention continues to do their work connecting community-based organizations with the resources they need to provide their critically important services. Last month, OVP was able to allocate the 4th phase of our April 2021 gun violence reduction ordinance funding. From this allocation, we were able to support 5 new and emerging community-based organizations to expand their operations in Portland and to address the violence that we're seeing in our city today. Through OVP, we've been able to partner with community-based organizations to do prevention, intervention, and follow-up work. In the prevention lane, we have the Violence Interruption Program that includes our street-level outreach workers. In the intervention and follow-up phase, We have the intensive case management program that provides intensive case managers as well as life coaches to high-risk individuals. These investments in the community are a critical piece of addressing gun violence. But standing alone, none of these efforts are sufficient in and of themselves. Gun violence knows no boundaries. Therefore, we see the ongoing need for commitment, for coordination, collaboration, and investments across all jurisdictions at all levels of government. We need to come together as a community and show that we will not tolerate this brutality. We need to come together to break these crippling cycles of violence. And we need to come together as a community to support the mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, and children whose lives are forever changed by these senseless acts of violence that we're seeing unfold on our streets. Justice demands courage in our actions, not just words. As outlined by my colleagues, there are many ways to help bring justice to these families while also ensuring the safety of those who choose to come forward. There are resources available to protect people from retaliation. Even anonymous information will help us to put an end to this horrific violence. So I'm asking my fellow Portlanders who may be able to help bring justice and healing to our community to show courage, to speak out. With courage, we can close this chapter in our city's history. Thank you.